Okay, well, hi everyone. It looks like we are live. It's so great to, virtually see you all in attendance. And good morning. So it's about 10:59, so we have about 1 minute before we officially get started. So we'll allow folks about a minute or so to trickle into the live stream and get settled. So this is a good time to go get a drink of water and get settled in because we have a really great program lined up for you all today. And if you can't hear me or anything like that, please let me know in the live comments and we will do our best to try to fix what we can. All right, hi. Oh, it's so great to see everyone trickling in. Hello. Oh, this is fantastic. So again, if you can't hear us for whatever reason, let us go ahead and let us know in the comments. But welcome everyone. It's so great to see you all. We'll get started in about a minute or so. We're just giving folks some time to get settled into the live stream before we officially kick things off. Okay. And if you want to, as we're waiting to get started and we're giving folks about a minute, go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments and say where you're watching from. We love to get to know our audience a little bit more. So go ahead and tell us hi and let us know where you're watching. Okay, fantastic. So let's just go ahead and officially get started. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, everyone. You are watching the Seymour Marine Discovery Center's Labside Chat. My name is Jen Cormier, and I am the Visitor Programs Manager at the Seymour Center, and I will be your host today. And today's Labside Chat is an opportunity to have a short, engaging discussion with a scientist from UC Santa Cruz Long Marine Lab. And in this virtual world, we are so excited to continue to show everyone how scientific research plays a role in the conservation of the world's oceans, even though most of us are still sheltering in place and indoors. So I'm really looking forward to today's Labside Chat because I have the pleasure and the privilege of talking to and asking questions to Dr. Eric Palkovacs. And before we dive into all of those questions, I do have a couple of quick thank yous right up top. I want to say thank you, one, for everyone tuning in today. It's so great to see you all. But I also want to say thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance for Eric. You all submitted such great questions. There were so many. So Eric and I will try our best to get through all of them. But if you have a question during our chat today, feel free to go ahead and add it into the live comments as well. And Eric and I will do our best to get to those too. But without further ado, Dr. Eric Palkovacs is here. Eric is an associate professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at UC Santa Cruz, as well as the associate director of the Institute of Marine Sciences Fisheries Collaborative Program, and just an all-around awesome person. And I'm so excited to talk to him today and about his research and his lab and what he's up to. So Eric, I can't say thank you enough for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course, we're so excited that you're here. And I know that you are engaged in some incredible research in freshwater ecology, coastal ecology, etc. But my very first question for you is actually, I was talking with someone that knows a little bit more about your research, knows what you do, and asked me to ask you, because they knew I was talking to you today, because this person understands that you study what's known as the eco-evolution dynamics of freshwater and coastal ecosystems. So can you help us understand what that eco-evolution dynamics means? What exactly is that, and how do you do research in that field?
That's a great question. So it starts really with the idea that we see individual level variation within and among populations, right? So every individual organism has slightly different traits. And so it's these slight differences in traits among individuals that creates the opportunity, one, for evolution to happen, right? As natural selection acts on populations. But what we've been finding more and more is that those individual level traits also impact ecological interactions, like predator-prey interactions, for example, really depend on both the traits of the individual predator and the traits of the prey. And so ecologists have traditionally thought about species level interactions. And we are really trying to delve a little bit more deeply into how these individual level traits shape those interactions, and then determine things like community ecological processes, ecosystem processes, and even all the way to human uses of organisms. For example, in fisheries, the traits of the fish you're trying to catch may make a big difference as to whether or not they are susceptible to being harvested or not susceptible to being harvested. And so humans influence these ecoevolutionary interactions also.
Mhm. Wow, that's amazing. So thank you for breaking that down for us. Because I know when that person asked me, they're like, ecoevolution, like what is that? So thank you so much for helping us to understand that a little bit more. And so I know that your lab is also very much engaged in the coastal watershed realm, right? So a lot of folks were really interested in your work with andromous fishes, or andromous fishes, excuse me. And so can you help us understand what exactly is this type of fish, and how and what exactly do you do research with on these types of fishes?
Yeah, so one of the groups of organisms we focus our work on are these anadromous fishes. So salmon are an example of an anadromous fish. And an anadromous life history is really just a complicated word for a life history where the fish spawns or reproduces in freshwater, migrates as a juvenile to the ocean, grows, does the majority of the life's growth in the ocean, and then migrates back to freshwater to reproduce. And so that is a fairly widespread life history amongst fishes. Salmon are our most sort of common reference point when we think about fish with this anadromous life history, but many other groups of fishes also are anadromous. Sturgeon are anadromous. Shads and river herring are anadromous. Lampreys are anadromous. And then interestingly, there is the opposite life history, which is called catadromous. So catadromous fishes reproduce in the ocean and do their growth in freshwater. And so things like American eel on the Atlantic coast, or Japanese eel and the longfin eels in New Zealand, those species are called catadromous.
Oh my goodness, that is so cool. I had no idea that lampreys had this really unique life cycle. So that's new to me. So that's really, really cool. So we all know salmon. Salmon's a pretty common example, right? A lot of us like to eat salmon. And so we know a lot about it. But I got a question about salmon in particular when they're out in the ocean, because salmon can be prey for a lot of different animals. And this person was specifically interested in the orca salmon relationship. And they asked if you could elaborate a little bit more about that orca salmon relationship as far as populations are concerned and the effects or imbalance in biodiversity of their particular ecosystem.
Yeah, there's been a lot of attention paid, especially in Washington State, with respect to this interaction between southern resident killer whales and these increasingly rare Chinook salmon, right? So we basically have this conflict in endangered species management where we have southern resident killer whales interacting or as predators on these also endangered Chinook salmon. And the reason why that's been an interesting problem to solve is that it appears that at least for that one population of killer whales, that there's a very specific diet preference for Chinook salmon. And even so specific that they appear to be feeding preferentially on the largest Chinook salmon. What's interesting about that in the context of eco-evolutionary dynamics is it has been suggested that that preference of the killer whales for the largest Chinook salmon is actually partly responsible for evolutionary downsizing of salmon that we've observed in recent times. So the salmon appear to be getting smaller. And one of the hypotheses out there is that it really is the targeted predation of these killer whales that is driving in part those size declines. So it's a controversial hypothesis, and other factors are probably also at play influencing decreases in salmon body size. Fishermen tend to select the largest salmon to catch. Climate change also tends to result in evolutionary downsizing. And so it's far from a resolved question, but it's an interesting hypothesis that really does get to both a conservation question as well as an eco-evolutionary question.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. That's, well, thank you so much for helping us understand that a little bit more. So you were talking a little bit about the threats that some salmon are facing as well. So, climate change or, them being fished or whatnot. But I wanted to focus on the climate change threat because I can only imagine that fish that are moving between saltwater and freshwater, or back and forth. Anyways, fish that are moving from, fresh to salt, that climate change has to have a huge impact on them, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about the impacts that you're seeing?
So the impacts do depend on where on the coast you're talking. Here on the Central Coast, one of the most important impacts of climate change in coastal ecosystems is precipitation patterns, changing precipitation patterns. So when we have a prolonged drought, for example, that influences stream flow and spawning habitat. It also influences the dynamics at the estuary mouth. So if people drive up the coast from Santa Cruz during the summer, you'll notice that many of the beaches actually are barriers between the estuary, which is behind the beach, and the ocean, right? And so in very dry times, the fish can actually have a problem accessing or entering the coastal watershed if these bars, these sandbars, don't open and allow flow out into the ocean. So we did see that occurring along the Central Coast during the prolonged drought several years ago, where anadromous fish were having a hard time accessing their freshwater spawning habitat. Other places, temperature is a big issue too. And increasingly, it's stream temperature is very stressful for juvenile salmonids, but increased ocean temperatures, like the marine heat waves we've been having, also play a role in terms of, predator-prey interactions in the ocean and what salmon have to eat and the predators that show up to eat them. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, it sounds like it's definitely hard to have this complicated lifestyle, right? So, but when you're doing your research, are you seeing any increase in adaptations this person specifically wants to know about the freshwater fish. So are you seeing any increase in adaptations in freshwater fish that is, I would say, in response maybe to these threats?
Yes, that's one of the key things that we are looking for all the time is, are these organisms able to adapt as the climate changes or as the environment changes, right? Some of this is climate change, but some of it is also just human-driven landscape changes in water use. And we do see adaptation to changing conditions. So we did a study using three-spined stickleback, which is a small estuary and stream fish all along the coast of California. And we had museum records and specimens that went back, basically into the 60s. And we look to track changes in the traits of those fish through time and relate those changes to environmental changes. And so through that time period, the conditions became drier and warmer, and the traits that we see in the fish reflect adaptations through time that allow them to cope better with those dry, warm conditions. And so we can track, we are starting to get to the point where we can track those adaptations, and they are occurring. And so I think from the standpoint of understanding what's going to allow populations to resist extinction in the face of climate change, it's very important to understand these adaptations that allow these populations to continue to exist in this changing environment.
Yeah, definitely. And so in that study, you said that you looked at the species of fish all along the California's coast. Is that correct? Yes. So were the adaptations that you saw, were they the same all up and down the coast, or was it specific adaptations that were, specifically identified to a region? So like were the fish in the north, do they have different adaptations than the fish in the south?
Yeah, so interestingly, what appears to be happening is the fish in Southern California have been adapted throughout this entire time period to a warm, dry set of conditions, because Southern California throughout this time period has been warm and dry. But in the Central Coast and in Northern California, we see different traits, right? But as those warm, dry conditions of Southern California start to creep northward, especially we are in a really interesting stretch of coast. We're in this sort of transition zone here in Santa Cruz, where to the south it's warm and dry, to the north it's cool and wet. But right here, we are transitioning from more of a cool, wet climate to a warm, dry climate. And so this is really the stretch of coast where we see the most change over this time period that reflects, fish adapting and basically going from fish that look much like Northern California fish in the 70s to now fish that look like Southern California fish in the 2010s. And so those fish have changed their traits, in order to really match the environmental conditions as those conditions have changed.
Yeah, wow. That's incredible. So we identify, a lot of the threats and, possibly some of the increasing adaptations that you're seeing. But how, so what can we do in terms of conservation, right? So, and I know that, I'm so glad that we have you and your team and your lab working on these issues, but how, one person asked a question is that how can we involve and motivate the community to help with conservation efforts? This person specifically asked or specifically provided an example about reusing potable water. And this person was also curious if there was any efforts to help with educating farmers or collaborate with farmers regarding, potential runoff or into the rivers and oceans. And so how can we involve and motivate the community to help with conservation efforts?
In coastal California and throughout California, wise water use is critical because these species depend on there being water in streams. And so things that people can directly do in their everyday lives to be conscious of their water use is very important. Also, people supporting policies that are directed at wise water use and specifically focusing on maintaining in-stream flows are very important because, the fish need the water in the stream. And so that's a very practical set of goals that we can have that will help create resilient freshwater ecosystems in California as the climate changes. These keeping freshwater flows becomes even that more critical as temperatures increase and as precipitation patterns become less predictable.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so, Eric, my question for you is that you are so incredibly knowledgeable. So, have you always been interested in this field and looking at the eco-evolutionary dynamics? So, what got you into the place that you are in today?
I started just being interested in animals and wildlife. And then those interests grew into specific interests in understanding evolution and how evolution works. And then thinking about, if evolution is happening all the time, all around us, what does that mean for ecological interactions and people? And the ways that people interact with the natural world. So it's always been an interest of mine to understand nature and to understand how people relate to nature. And so, that's basically been my passion throughout my life. And so ecoevolutionary dynamics in my study focal areas now are a reflection really of kind of that long-standing interest I've always had in understanding how nature works.
Oh, well, that's so great to hear. And so, do you have any advice for any aspiring marine scientists or just scientists in general as they embark on their careers?
I would say for people to follow their passions, because if you follow your heart and your interests, you can never be bored. It makes your job always fun and interesting. And I think another one is to look for new ideas and new things to study and to think about, because more new things just inspire you to make connections that you've never seen before. And so one of the things that is a hallmark of my lab group is we work on a lot of different animals and a lot of different places. And sometimes that feels a little overwhelming, but what it allows me to do is to make connections between different ecosystem types and different species that then hopefully will eventually lead to an understanding of the bigger picture of what's going on out there in nature as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's so great. And so, Eric, we are just running out of time so quickly here. But before we officially sign off, I want to ask you, what is the best part of your job or the most memorable part of your career so far?
The best part of my job is really interacting with students and seeing these questions and problems sort of in new ways through their eyes. And that's really fun because they will see things that I never saw before. And I learn a lot from interacting with students, and they bring an energy and an enthusiasm to the research that, that is just sort of continuously inspiring. So, the most fun and rewarding part of my job, and what allows us to make a lot of progress, is interacting with students that sort of bring that spark.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's so great to hear. Well, Eric, I just can't say thank you enough for joining us today. And I wish we had more time. Your research and your field of study is so fascinating. And so, do you have a website or a place where folks can go online to learn more about your research and your lab and what you do?
Yeah, so if you Google the UCSC Freshwater and Coastal Ecology Lab, that will take you to my lab website, where you can learn a little bit more about the work we're doing and even download some of our publications if you're interested in looking at those. And you can follow me on Twitter at Eric Palkovacs. And whenever we publish a new paper, I try to make a Twitter post so that people can see what we're up to. And so hopefully people can follow us a little bit and give us some feedback. on what you think about our research.
Yeah, definitely. And I will post the link to your website as well as your Twitter handle, excuse me, down in the video description right after this, so folks can easily access it. I know that I wrote down your Twitter handle, so I can also follow you guys too. So thank you so much again. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in today. It's really folks like you that make these online programs possible. And so if you are watching today and if you are in the position, I do ask that you please consider making a donation to the Seymour Center or becoming a member with us. You can find more information on our website, which is seymourcenter.ucsc.edu. That will also be posted down in the video description. And while you're there on our website, go ahead and sign up for our e-newsletter. That is another great way how you can support us, stay in touch with us, also follow us on social media too. But I can't say thank you enough for everyone who tuned in today. Make sure to save the date for our next Labside Chat. It will be on July 2nd, so mark your calendars. But Eric and I both hope that you all are staying safe, staying healthy, and we will see you next time. So take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.